All right, next we're going to look at sex-linked inheritance. And these are so just to let you know, sex chromosomes have more genes on them than just the genes that determine the sex of the individual. All right, so many more genes on them. So the first one we're going to look at is Y-linked inheritance. So Y-linked inheritance, these are genes that are transmitted on the Y chromosome. Now, these are kind of rare traits, and they're rare because there are few genes on the Y chromosome. If we go back to this picture here, this is showing the size of the X chromosome in comparison to the Y. There are about 1,000 genes on the X chromosome, only 92 genes on the Y chromosome. All right? The real important gene that is found on the Y chromosome is the SRY gene, and that stands for sex-determining region on the Y. All right, so SRY. All right, so this produces a single protein that then causes the production of testosterone, and that turns the individual from being male to female. All right, so obviously that Y chromosome is passed father to son. So I have the Y chromosome that my dad had, and he had the Y chromosome that his grandfather had, and he had the Y chromosome that his grandfather had, and so on. Okay? So this is one of the ways that we can track how people move throughout the globe, is looking at the Y chromosome. Just on a side note, you can also track them maternally through the mitochondrial DNA, because that is only passed mother to offspring. All right, so let's move on to X-linked traits. So X-linked traits, also known as just sex-linked traits, these are genes that are transmitted on the X chromosome. These traits are much more common in men than women. They're generally recessive traits. Now, the reason that they're more common in men is because there are 1,000 genes on the X, and then there are very few genes, as I mentioned, only 92 genes on the Y. So whatever trait, so if we go back for a second, and I told you guys already that, that for every trait we have, we get a gene from our mom and a gene from our dad for that trait. And that is 100% true for you ladies, but it's not true for guys. Because when you look at those sex chromosomes, you have about 1,000 genes on the X chromosome, only 92 on the Y. So what that means is you get about, guys get about 900 genes only from their moms for those traits. There is no corresponding gene from their dad for those traits. So whatever their mom gives them, well, that's what they are. So all guys are actually 900 more genes their mom than they are their dad. All right? So what that means is these are traits that the X chromosome will have that the Y chromosome does not have. All right? And so that's why these traits are much more common in males. Females can get them, but it's not as common. It's more rare for them to occur. All right? Women are generally carriers for these. I kind of mentioned that when I was talking about sex-linked inheritance with pedigrees a little bit. They will generally skip generations, and they'll do so in a pattern from maternal grandfather to grandson. Not always so. All right? So, some traits that we see for this. One I've already mentioned before is hemophilia. That's where you don't produce a clotting factor. Another is Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. In Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, you don't produce a protein that helps your muscles contract. And so what happens to these kids is eventually their muscles stop contracting, and it's really a horrific disease in which these kids die before they're the age of 20, because it eventually affects the muscles that help them breathe. Lastly is red-green color blindness. Red-green color blindness is if you are red-green colorblind, you can't tell that this says 52 and this one says 14. So everybody see the 52 and the 14? I'm totally messing with you. That is 74 and 42. And if you cannot read the 74 and 42, you're red-green colorblind. All right, moving on. Let's look at X-linked, so X inactivation. So X inactivation is a turning off of one X chromosome in each cell at a certain point in development. Oh, forgot to tell you guys, go to the video about sex-linked problems or X-linked problems. All right? So, back to this. Now, so you ladies are going to get 2 X chromosomes, but the reality is you only use one of those. And it's random which one you are going to use. So somewhere in development, one of those X chromosomes turns off while the other one stays on. All right? So this is showing an example of X inactivation. So when you see a tortoiseshell cat or a calico cat, that's showing that example of X inactivation because the fur color gene is found on the X chromosome. And so it's random which one of these is used. So it's a flip of the coin. And that's why you see with these tortoiseshell cats, no 2 of them have the same color pattern, same with calicos. And you can be assured, well, 99.999% of the time, that that is a female cat. So if you see a tortoiseshell or calico cat, you go, oh, isn't she pretty? And you want to cuddle with her and everything else. Anyway, one of the things about one problem that can arise with X inactivation is that carriers for such things as hemophilia and Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and even color blindness can experience some problems because in some of their genes, some of their cells, that X chromosome with that bad gene could be turned on. All right, so let's look at autosomal sex-determined inheritance. So these are genes and traits that are not on the sex chromosomes, but the sex of the individual helps determine that trait. So the first is called a sex-limited trait. This is a trait that is exhibited in only one of the 2 sexes. And this is what we see with bird feather coloration. So, you see the peacock here, brightly colored, has a lot of eye spots. This is the peahen, much more drab in coloration. We'll get to, when we talk about evolution later on this semester, we'll talk about how this came to be. But this is a sex-limited trait. Testosterone is causing all these traits of the male to show up like so. All right? But these are genes that are not on the sex chromosomes. They're autosomal traits, but the sex of the individual is helping to determine. Next is a sex-influence trait. This is a trait that appears in both sexes, but is dominant in one sex, and it's recessive in the other. Okay? So this trait that you can see that all these, come on. Have you ever seen a better looking group of guys in your life? Holy cow, look at these guys. Just, they all exhibit, this wonderful, wonderful trait of male pattern baldness. And yeah, these are all friends of mine. And if you want to be a friend of mine, you also have to be bald as well. I'm kind of joking about that. But anyway, so what we see with male pattern baldness, though, it's dominant in males and it's recessive in females. It doesn't mean that females can't get it. It's just much harder for them to get it. All right? So one of the things that you maybe see with these guys, but what you notice with men in general is that some guys will go bald in the front, some might just get a patch in the back. And so we see variation in that trait. And anytime we see variation in it, it also indicates it's not a single gene trait, that it is also polygenic. And so there's about 99 genes that have been found associated with male pattern baldness, and fully 60% of all males will go bald in some fashion.